Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm audible. And thank you so much for joining us for our third episode of Experience. And today, our topic is taxable and non taxable persons and tax base. So, I'm sure that in the previous sessions, everybody has gained some practical knowledge and some insights which will really helpful to implement in their businesses or to understand if they have any kind of interviews also. So we have based all of these knowledge. So it's not just helping companies, but also those people who want to just gain knowledge. And we are trying our best to make it as much practical as possible. So you're not just gaining the bookish knowledge, but you're getting the practical implications, like how you can improve your processes. Because nowadays it's not just about registration. Now it's about how you can improve your processes, how you can improve your tax compliances. So without further ado, and this session, because of Ramadan timing, so we have limited our session to only 30 minutes. Before it was for 45 minutes. So during the month of Ramadan, this will be 30 minutes. So we will try our best to optimize this whole time and to give you as much knowledge as possible. So once again, I would like to introduce Sabah Iqbal. Sabah, thank you, Sabah Wahaj. Thank you so much for the third episode, and over to you.
Thank you, Kareem. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and Ramadan Kareem. So, welcome to our third session. So, we're still around the taxable and non-taxable person. We couldn't finish it last time, so here we are. So today we're gonna mainly discuss state source income and permanent establishment, which is like the third and fourth topic. We're gonna be covering some of the decisions which has come across, which relates to the topic, and a guide. So this is the breakup of the topic which we have today. I couldn't touch base upon out of scope person last time. So I'm going to start it from there. Again, the same table which we are looking at since 3 sessions. So we discussed how we can have a taxable person or a exempt person. So who can be a out of scope person? So anybody who doesn't fit into, as I said in my last session as well, anybody who cannot fit into taxable person or exempt person becomes an out of scope person. But just to give you some examples on how it happens. So any natural person who doesn't conduct a business or business activity becomes out of scope, like you and me. Any natural person who conducts a business or business activity, but their turnover is within the exemption, the small business relief, the exemption for the natural person coming through the cabinet decision number 49, which I have given. So if you have 1 million or turnover less than 1 million, then you are still out of scope because you don't have to register, even though you're a natural person having business or business activity. Or you are a natural person who's not a UAE resident and you also don't have a state source income. So these are kind of a natural persons who, or a resident person who will be out of scope for UAE corporate tax. Then coming to the non-resident, any non-resident which has no connections with UAE is actually out of scope for the UAE corporate tax. But just to give you some examples, somebody who doesn't have any permanent establishment in the UAE, somebody who doesn't derive any state source income in the UAE, or who has no nexus in the UAE, or any other foreign company which is not managed or controlled in the UAE, so has no connections in the UAE, so they will be out of scope. There could be many other scenarios, but that's all we have. There was a time where we have assumed that the transparent partnerships which we have within UAE are out of scope because the partners will be taxed in their hands, because they are transparent partnership, they are passed through. But from the decision which came around like 1 month ago or 2 months ago, the FTA decision number 16. Now the partnerships, even though they are transparent or pass through unincorporated partnerships, typically and officially how we call them, they still have to register for corporate tax. They will have a non-active tax registration number. So we cannot say anymore that they're out of scope for the UAE corporate tax. They will be kind of in the ambit of UAE corporate tax, but they will be still taxed in the hands of the partners if they are passed through, if they have an unincorporated partnership and they have not opted to make it a taxable person. We will be discussing it further later on in some of our webinar, but just to give you an idea about what could be an out of scope person. I am back again on my tax base slide, which we have used in our previous 2 sessions as well. And that's where I can start with when we talk about state source income or permanent establishment. So, we have discussed what could be a resident person or what could make you a non-resident person, although still coming under the ambit of UAE corporate tax. So we're now only gonna we will only be discussing the yellow highlighted topics for today from this slide. So if there is a company which is a non-resident for UAE legislation purposes, let's say it's a foreign resident company, but it has a permanent establishment in the UAE, or it derives some state source income from the UAE. This is the something which we're going to discuss today. If it has a nexus in the UAE, then it's still taxable for UAE corporate tax purposes, but it's going to be discussed in the next session. So any non-resident company having a permanent establishment in the UAE, it comes under the UAE corporate tax radar, or any non-resident person or a company which has a state source income, it again comes under the UAE corporate tax radar. Now, there is something which is relevant from the corporate tax guide, which I've given on the right side in the gray box. The guide is about a non-resident person, and these are some of the takeaways which are relevant. So it just says that who is a non-resident person, yeah? So not all non-resident persons are subject to UAE corporate tax. They have explained it in very simple terms, but whoever is subject to UAE corporate tax, as in a non-resident person, they are considered, they are just being discussed as non-resident person, but they are actually taxable non-resident person for UAE corporate tax. That's what they mean. And when or who is required to be registered for corporate tax if they are a non-resident person. So if you have a permanent establishment in the UAE or you have a nexus in the UAE, then you are required to register for corporate tax. But if you just earn a state source income, which is point number 2 on the left side, the second yellow numbered type of the non-resident, then you are not required to register for corporate tax. If you earn a state source income and you are a non-resident, you are just having implications for withholding tax, which is 0% for now. The another takeaway here is that a non-resident person that is required to register for corporate tax is subject to same rules as any other resident person. And the small business relief is not available to a non-resident person because the small business relief option says that it's only available for resident persons. Now, coming to the state source income, because it's a shorter topic, although it's the second topic for us from the previous slide, but it's shorter to cover, so I've put it first. So, what is a state source income? It is something. So, we are only discussing today from an aspect of a non-resident person. Okay, so whatever I'm gonna talk is something which a non-resident could be doing and which can come under the radar of UAE corporate tax. So if a non-resident is deriving income from a resident person, or if it is deriving an income from a non-resident person, but that non-resident person has a permanent establishment in the UAE, and that income is linked to the permanent establishment of that non-resident. And then the third thing is that then the non-resident person is earning something from activities performed or asset located or capital invested or service performed or benefited or consumed in the UAE. So if any non-resident person who doesn't have a subsidiary here, who is actually not even moving to UAE to do or conduct a business, but they are maybe selling goods to a resident, maybe providing a service to a non-resident, having a P in the UAE, or maybe just transacting through an asset, a land in the UAE, for example, or through a stock exchange in the UAE. So they are earning state source income. Now, the law has also given some a bit more specific about what could be a state source income. So it's like I can say there are examples, but then it's not an exhaustive list. It just says that it includes but not limited to. So what could be a state source income in more easy way as the law has defined? It could be a sale of good in the state. Whenever the law says in the state, it means in the UAE. Income from the provision of service in the UAE or where it has been consumed in the UAE. Any contract which has been performed or wholly, partially, or which has been consumed or benefited into UAE. Something related to a movable or immovable property in the UAE, in the state. Share of capital, or investing into share and selling them to somebody in the UAE who is resident in the UAE. Or any right of use, permission to use of any property. It could be soft, it could be a immobile or movable tangible property. So that any loans which is given to a resident person in the UAE or a government entity, or it is related to a loan which is secured through a mobile or immobile property in the UAE. And when it comes to insurance, it's the assets which are insured in the UAE. A person who is UAE person and is taking any, let's say, life insurance from outside UAE, but it's insured and is a resident or she's a resident of UAE, or it's a activity which is being insured itself in the UAE, like a business activity or a project. So these are, it's not an exhaustive list again, but these are some of the examples and most of the examples which can create a state source income for a non-resident. Now, another takeaway here from a guide that state source income derived by a non-resident that is not attributable to PM may be subject to withholding tax. So what it means is that when you don't have a PE, so we will discuss what constitutes a PE, but just to close this point, if you don't have a PE and you are just earning a state source income without having a presence in the UAE, then you are not registered, you are not required to register for corporate tax, as I said before, and you will be only subject to withholding tax. So maybe few of you who are dealing in, for example, Saudi, you would have seen that there is withholding tax. Yeah. So whenever you are making a payment to a non-resident, you have to withhold a certain amount from the invoice value. So it's the same concept. So somebody as a foreigner providing a service into UAE, assuming if there was a withholding tax, maybe for example 2%, so then a resident person who is actually benefiting will have to withhold the amount from the invoice value and then submit it to the tax authorities. But for now, there is no withholding tax, as in the rate of tax 0%, but there is also no requirement to file or submit any declaration in terms of withholding tax or declare that who you are paying to. There is no compliance requirement either. Going to the next slide. That's all we have, and that's all the law says about the state source income. Now, the other thing through which a non-resident can come into a UAE corporate tax radar is a permanent establishment. So most of you guys would be familiar with what a permanent establishment is, that you could be legally registered in another country, but by some means you could be present in another country, which is UAE right now from the UAE corporate tax perspective. So I'll go with the law and how the law defines it. So if a non-resident have a fixed or permanent place, or a non-resident have somebody in the UAE who is exercising authority to conduct a business in the UAE on behalf of the non-resident, or the non-resident have some kind of nexus in the UAE. So nexus itself is a separate topic to discuss. So I'm not going to touch upon the nexus today. It's going to be in the next session. So we're going to be talking about the fixed or permanent place, or if you have a person in the UAE who is habitually exercising a conduct of business through their presence and through their activities. Again, the law gives some types which can constitute the fixed or permanent place in the UAE. So the first point from clause article 1, that either you have a place of management or commercial decisions in the UAE, you have a branch in the UAE, like banks have, foreign banks have branches in the UAE. Yeah. So you could have an office, like a license office in the UAE. You could have a factory in the UAE, although your company is outside UAE. You could have a workshop. Somebody as a non-resident could be owing a land or a building, or could be renting that. You could have an installation structure because of oil explorations or natural resource explorations. You could be a construction company and you could have a site or a construction office where you could be working to deliver a project. So in the case of the construction projects or building sites, you need to at least be present for 6 months, although it is subject to double tax treaties. If the double tax treaty with the country of the non-resident allows more time than 6 months, then you get the benefit of the double tax treaty. But if there is no double tax treaty, then 6 months is the timeline. Now, the idea here is that any non-resident who comes into the UAE or sends its representative in the UAE, then you have to look at it not only from the legal perspective that, for example, you don't have a company established in the UAE, but from a substance over base assumption that if that person, or if the multiple group of people who are being sent into the UAE, are they conducting business in the UAE or not? If they are conducting business in the UAE and it's a core income generating business for the non-resident, then it tends to create a permanent establishment. Now, it's very case to case basis, and this topic is very sensitive, and it should be literally discussed on very specific scenarios of each and every company, but this is what the law says. Now, the takeaway here is that sometimes you would have a state source income. So you see the first gray box, it says that sometimes you would have a state source income and you would also have a PE. So what will happen in that case, that because you have a PE, you will be registering for corporate tax, and you cannot differentiate that your state source income will not be subject to corporate tax in the UAE. In that case, they will be looked at cumulatively, and your state source income will be subject to tax in the UAE because you have a PE in the UAE, and they will be looked together. Again, another thing is that a UAE branch of a non-resident is deemed to be an extension of a non-resident. So, most of you guys who would be having branches of non-residents from UAE, in the UAE, you have a slightly different registration requirement. Yeah, so you don't register the branch, you register the non-resident. So when you have a branch in the UAE, for example, the foreign banks or there are construction companies, there are other kinds of companies as well. So in that case, the non-resident is considered as they have extended their presence in the UAE, but they are only taxed for the UAE business and not for their whole business. Another takeaway is that the 6-month threshold is again also tested on consolidation of all types of activities. So for example, if a building site is there for like 3 months for a project, and then there is another building site which is there for another 3 months, so that's all going to be considered cumulatively and not on a project to project basis. So presence of that company and its representative is being considered on a consolidated level and not on a project by project level. Now, the law also gives some exceptions to what we have just discussed. So if somebody as a non-resident have a mere presence in the UAE, which is not adding up to their business, or it's not for a core income generating activity, then it will not constitute a PE. So then you see some types which the law has defined to make it more simpler. So let's say if there is a storing facility or displaying facility, but you're not actually conducting a business through that store, then it will not tend to create a PE. Then if there is a place where you are just stocking or merchandising goods just so that another person can process them, so it's just a warehouse and you're storing the goods, you're not like buying selling through that warehouse, it's just a storage facility, then it will not be creating a permanent establishment. Then if you are doing a preparatory activity like before conducting a business, for example doing a research work or just gathering data about the types of people who spend on this thing or that thing, or it's something which is auxiliary in nature of the business of the non-resident, for example a liaison office for marketing, or if there is a combination of any of these activities, then if that person is actually not conducting a business in the UAE or through UAE in other jurisdictions, then it doesn't tend to create permanent establishment. That's the exception in the law. But then the law gives an exception to the exception, and it says that although there are exceptions of these lies in office and auxiliary nature of work and all, but there are two scenarios where you will still be creating PE. So number one is that where that place, for example, you have an auxiliary nature of business in the UAE, but then you have another office where you are actually conducting business. So you cannot say that this is auxiliary and this is business, so I will not pay tax on the auxiliary. No, then they will be looked upon together, and you will be conducting business for all of your activities. So that's the intention of the law, that you cannot bifurcate and fragment. So most of the mature laws come with an anti-fragmentation concept, that you cannot break down your activities in a way that all the activities, when you look at them separately, they look like they're not actually doing any business, but when you club them together, it looks like, yeah, there is a business. So you have to look at them together. So the law says where the same place or the other place constitute a permanent establishment of a non-resident or its related party, then you will not get away with the exception. Or the overall activity resulting from the combination of these activities and some other activities which the non-resident could be doing, then you will, see it in cohesiveness, and then you will realize that okay, it's conducting a business, then you will not get away with the exception of permanent establishment. Then the another clause which is important, which is the second part of the law. So coming back to the first slide of permanent establishment, the first requirement was that having a fixed place or a permanent place. Yeah, so for now we have just discussed the first part. Then the second part is that the person has and habitually exercises an authority to conduct business or business activity in the state, in the UAE, on behalf of a non-resident. So you get a hint of agency here, or like you're a non-resident and you're either hiring somebody in the UAE or sending somebody to UAE. So this is what the law talks about as the second part. And the law says that when that happens, so there are two conditions to that. The person habitually conducts or concludes contracts on behalf of the non-resident in a manner that they are binding in nature, or the person negotiates on behalf of the non-resident without having a need to materially modify by the non-resident person. So like he don't need an approval, he is actually the approving authority, or he has this much delegation of authority that he can decide on spot on his own. So it's kind of a person who is your representative in the UAE and conducting business in the UAE through his presence or her presence, and it is kind of having all the decision making powers. Coming back to the condition of habitually exercising the authority, the law says gives the flavor of an independent agent here, and the clause 6 of the article 14 says that if the activity has been conducted through an independent agent and they are doing it in their ordinary course of business, then it will not be considered as a PE. But then you also get a flavor of a dependent agent here, that if that person is not an independent agent, he's a dependent agent, then it will tend to create a PE. Now, the other concept is the clause number 7, which talks about the natural person and the PE. So when a natural person can create a PE, it's quite although linked from the first and second condition that you will be creating a fixed place, then you might be having a office, and office could have people where you will conduct business, or when there will be somebody in the state which will do decision making on behalf of the non-resident, then again there will be somebody involved to do that. So that's where the non-natural person comes in. So the only reason where this will not create a P is the clause number 7. So the law says that there will be more conditions which are defined can be defined by the minister, but sometimes a presence of a natural person, which could be a representative of a non-resident in the UAE, but they will not create a permanent establishment in the UAE. And when can that be? So that can be when the presence of that non-resident person is just consequence of something else, or it's temporary, or it's just an exceptional situation. So let's say in COVID, many people were stuck in different places, yeah, and they were doing business or they were performing their works remotely. So that will not create a PE in another country for a non-resident just because a natural person is present in another country by coincidence, by consequence, by a exceptional situation. Now, where the natural person is employed by the non-resident and they meet all of these conditions, then this applies that they are in the state, but they are not doing a core income generating activity. So again, the work from home example, that sometimes you allow your employees to work from anywhere in the world for a certain period of days. And in that case, for example, that's a finance person, yeah, and they are going back to their home country and doing their work for a little while. So because finance is back office support, they are not involved in a core income generating activity. So being mere presence of a finance person in their home country doesn't create a permanent establishment. Now, and they should not be earning the state source income. So let's say somebody is coming to UAE and they are coming here with an intention that they want to generate business for the non-resident here, and they start creating state source income. In that case, they will create a PE in the UAE for the non-resident. Now, the guide also gives some more hints about how we can identify a fixed place or permanent establishment in the UAE. So there are some types of tests which a business can.
Sorry to serve, Sabah. So we
Yeah.
have just 2 minutes left. So would you like
Yeah.
to end up and take some questions?
So I'll just finish this. I was telling Sohaib also that I don't think so we will be able to take any questions because the time is very short. But you can always drop the questions in the link we have given. So we can come back to you on your email address or phone number. But if there is anything very specific, let me look at it and then I can take it up later on.
Perfect. So would you like to just wind up the session for today?
So we will leave the session for today here then, and we're going to continue from here in the next session. Thank you all for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sabah. Definitely, that was insightful. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We know that this is a time when all of us, we are trying to finish up everything within a very short time. So that's why we have limited this session as well for 30 minutes. And hopefully in the next sessions, if you have any kind of questions, so we already have a link in our chat box, so you can drop your questions and Sabah and the team will be getting back to you with all the responses. And hopefully we'll be looking forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you so much once again, and Ramadan Kareem.